Charlie's quiet life in the old house is disrupted by the behavior of his wife, who has decided that she can do whatever she wants and go unpunished. His wife cheated on him with his friend, and now he has only one goal: revenge. I examined the old tree meticulously. Even a slight miscut could send it tumbling into an undesired area, causing me numerous problems. Although I was still distressed about having to remove it, the storm and the multiple lightning strikes made it necessary to act immediately. Yes, I mentioned multiple strikes. Anyone claiming that lightning never hits the same place twice clearly doesn't understand how lightning works. This tree was likely the oldest, tallest, and largest in the entire region. Before it was struck by lightning for the third time, it stood nearly 180 feet high. You might wonder how I know this. Last weekend I topped the tree and the highest cut measured 43 feet from the tip. The second or middle cut was just over 42 feet. After removing the midsection, I measured the remaining part to ensure I had trimmed enough so it wouldn't encroach on the neighbor's property, just to be safe. The pressure was as intense as it could be that day. If it's not obvious by now, I'm a logger. Well, I used to be a logger, but now I oversee cutting operations and manage timber sales. We've resided in this old house for many years. In fact, when we first purchased it, we only had 2 neighbors. Josh, our next-door neighbor, had retired long before we moved in, and at the bottom of the hill lived Mrs. Frazier, who had also been there for a very long time. Fast forward about 10 years, and a whole development has sprung up around us, erasing most of the reasons we chose to live here. Most of the trees were cleared to make way for roads, driveways, and new homes. To me, the area now appears sterile, almost urbanized. During the process of obtaining the permit to cut down the tree, the city officials decided to restrict the number of days any part of the tree could remain standing. They also set a short time frame after each section was felled to clean up the debris. When I cut the final part of the tree, I had roughly 3 days in total to chop it into firewood and have it removed, as planned. The remaining section stood at approximately 80 feet tall, with the trunk's base measuring about 10 feet in diameter. The upper part was just under 6 feet in diameter, indicating a substantial amount of work ahead. Converting the entire tree into firewood was going to require several long days. The process of cutting down this tree had turned into something of a high-profile event when a group of tree huggers attempted to stop anyone from felling the venerable tree. They argued that the tree was still alive and, with proper care, could thrive for another 200 years. The matter went to court, where the judge declared the tree dead. Foresters from an independent organization examined the tree and the lightning strikes it had endured, determining that the sap was no longer viable and had dried up, confirming the tree's death. While the branches hadn't realized it yet, they would soon fall. Josh, Old Lady Frazier, and the judge stood to gain from this, as I intended to provide all of them with firewood. Josh's woodshed was already stocked with the upper and middle sections, and today's cutting would completely fill Frazier's shed, likely leaving enough to supply 2 or 3 cords outside both of their sheds as well. As I was assessing the entire project and planning my cuts, Josh approached me with his movie camera in hand. Well, it was technically a camcorder, but I still referred to them as movie cameras. Old habits die hard. "Hey there, neighbor. Mind if I film what's happening?" "Not at all. In fact, I'd like a copy once we're finished, if you don't mind." "Sure thing. Do you want me to film your entire property while I'm at it? Do you think you can capture everything as the tree falls and all?" "Absolutely. It would be my pleasure to help you out, son. You've been an excellent neighbor all these years. I'm going to miss you when you move on." Old Josh often thought years ahead during their conversations. He had always been someone who focused far into the future. Many people didn't notice this about him and would sometimes give him odd looks. To him, Hours, days, weeks, and months could pass by in what felt like mere seconds. You're not planning to move anytime soon, Josh. We've discussed that plenty. Yeah, we have. It's a pity. A real pity it is. He was gazing out at the front yard. We were standing near his front deck because I had visited there while inspecting the drop zone. Yeah, not too bad, though, I responded. Things are born, they grow, and then they die. It's the cycle of life. Some things die a bit sooner than necessary, though. True. Sometimes nature does its own thing, no matter what anyone thinks. Exactly. Old Lady Frazier, the judge, and I are really lucky. Our 2 woodsheds are going to be completely full. With the wood from this tree and that old yellow cedar you chopped down for me, I'll have enough for several years of heating. I really appreciate that. No problem. I needed to do something with the wood. I sure won't use it all myself, at least not now. So, you're all set then? Going through with it until the end? Yep, pretty much. I think the City Hall folks will be a bit surprised to see it down today instead of this weekend, though. Well, they say that storm is coming on Friday. Can't have that tree standing during a windstorm. You know, the news crew will be here any minute, right? Yep. That's another reason I decided to do it today. The weekend would have every Tom, Di, and Harry there, either protesting or gawking and drinking. I hope I don't wake the dead or bother anyone while cutting it down. That would be a real shame. I have too much to do and not enough time to get it all done, it seems. Oh, I think you'll manage. So you still want me to call those people right after you fell it? Yeah. The lawyer first and then about 20 minutes later. Mary. Okay. I sure hope you know what you're doing, Charlie. If I'm right, Mary might get a jump start on getting here. I've thought this through several times before, you know that. Well, not exactly like it's happening today, I'd say. Tree's a tree, Josh. He gave me a stern look, then smiled. He shook his head and turned to go into his house. As he reached the top of the stairs to his deck, he called back over his shoulder. Give me about 10 minutes to set up the camera upstairs and then get it done. Will do, Josh. I approached my pickup truck and retrieved my Johnsard 42-inch bar chainsaw. It was a beast of a machine that I hadn't fired up in quite some time. Chainsaws like this simply aren't manufactured anymore. The chain featured carbide inserts on the teeth, making it incredibly sharp and lethal. It could even slice through steel. The carbide chain was specifically designed to cut through spikes and other materials embedded in tree trunks. I had just serviced the motor, and the day before, I personally sharpened the chain using my diamond wheel grinder. This chainsaw was exceptionally fast at cutting and had more than enough horsepower for the task ahead. Since I was within city limits, I had no choice but to attach a muffler to the powerful tool, much to the annoyance of both Josh and me. We had grown up working with loud, aggressive chainsaws and enjoyed the roar they made as they effortlessly devoured large logs. The permit for cutting the tree included a requirement for the muffler, so I had to comply. I planned to follow the rules carefully, at least until things settled down. I took one last look around and then began positioning myself for the final cut on the tree. I had inserted 3 wedges, 2 on the southern end and 1 on the northern side, to help guide the tree's fall. From what I could tell, the tension in the trunk would cause the tree to suddenly release, spinning, or as my wife Chris would describe it, pirouetting, completing almost a full rotation before it started to descend. This meant the tree would shift about 1 to 2 feet north from the remaining stump, and its fall would be influenced by the reduced support on that side. I predicted it would topple towards the west-northwest and land almost perfectly alongside the sidewalk. It had been a while since I had felled a tree of this size, so I might be a bit rusty and slightly off in my estimation. I hoped not, though. I really wanted it to fall just right. Watching TV news reporters always makes you want to get things done correctly. I glanced around briefly and noticed several pickup trucks arriving near the TV van a short distance away. Two of the guys from those trucks were talking to old lady Frazier, who was gesturing in my direction, and they were all grinning broadly. It felt almost like a party atmosphere. To be honest, it was heartbreaking. This old tree and I had a history, and I never imagined I'd be the one to cut it down, especially in this manner. I gave the saw one last check, and seeing Josh all set, I turned it on. It ran smoothly, though much too quietly. I despise that darn muffler. Carefully, I started cutting into the tree's base, making every effort to maintain a precise angle. I paused briefly to drive the wedges deeper on the south side. The north side was already secure. Just before hearing the snap, I sensed the saw moving. I stepped back, removing the saw with the practiced motions developed over years. Turning off the saw, I retreated 3 more steps to create some space, just in case. Even the most experienced loggers can overlook something. Trees can sometimes resist, even in their final moments. As I expected, the tree shifted forward slightly and began to rotate. I watched the top start to lean and realized I had executed it perfectly. Smiling, I walked toward the front porch. As I reached the top step, I heard the satisfying crunch of wood and metal. A brief screech followed, then silence. I didn't even look back, confident that the tree had fallen as planned. It wasn't nearly as loud as I had anticipated, which surprised me. I glanced at Josh, who was still filming from his upper deck, and gave him the thumb and pinky gesture to make the calls. He waved his cell phone and pointed toward the news van. He mimed saying, "Live on the scene," with exaggerated mouth movements. I understood, and silently mouthed live in response. I could see the reporter approaching, while the cameraman stayed near the van to capture a comprehensive view of the front, side, and back of our house. It looked like things were about to get quite eventful around here. Still holding the now silent saw, I opened our front door and walked into the living room. I looked at the coffee table I had spent 3 months building for Chris, now placed as usual but scattered with lingerie and underwear. In the center stood a wine bottle and 2 glasses, neither with coasters underneath. Another painful thought struck me. She had never treated that table well, despite the time, effort, sweat, and love I had put into making it for her. Setting the saw down, I grabbed the $240 backpack that Chris had insisted on when she started her new job from the closet where it had been gathering dust for 6 months. Unzipping it, I began stuffing the underwear from the coffee table into it. Next, I picked up the black dress and pantyhose. Moving around the table, I bent down to collect the man's shirt and socks lying underneath. I then grabbed his pants, removing his wallet as well. I opened my wallet, puzzled over why Chris always blasted her stereo at such an unbearable volume. I considered myself fortunate, because if it hadn't been playing, they might have heard the massive tree trunk crashing onto their cars. The loud music had served its purpose. I was relieved that those 10 bags of cat litter had ended up beneath them before I proceeded to chop down the tree. I paused to grab Chris's purse and opened it up. I took out some keys and her wallet, then threw them into the backpack as well. My thoughts drifted to her new truck, which she adored. She had customized it to closely match her best friend's truck, with the main difference being that hers ran on gasoline while her friend's was diesel-powered. Chris's truck was a brand-new 4-door, 4-wheel drive model, equipped with custom wheels and an upgraded stereo system. The truck her friend had in front of hers still looked similar upon reflection, except his vehicle still had a lien from the lender. Pete, my former best friend, still owed around $32,000 on his beast of a truck. In contrast, Chris had traded in her BMW for her pickup and managed to clear all debt on the truck thanks to her car's valuation at that time. She had allowed a friend to persuade her to maintain only the state-required minimum liability insurance instead of the full coverage I had advised. Now that decision would backfire. Her nice pickup was fully paid off, but worthless. That same friend had also somehow convinced himself to reduce his insurance from full coverage to just the minimum liability. As a result, he was stuck owing a significant amount on a vehicle that was now practically worthless. Interesting, I mused as I picked up the saw and backpack. I approached our bedroom door and could clearly hear the music through the closed door, along with sounds of grunting and groaning. When I tried the door, it was locked, which wasn't surprising. Chris had always been diligent about locking the door during intimacy, even though we didn't have any children. I placed the backpack beside the expensive suitcase I had already set there and took a step back to give myself room to swing the saw. I turned it on and heard muffled exclamations as the chain began to cut through the door around the lock area. Within 2 or 3 seconds, I freed the door from the lock. I pushed it open just in time to see Pete standing neck-deep by the bed. He appeared frightened. No, more than just a little scared. He looked genuinely terrified. Chris was already on the other side, crying and trying to shield herself from my view, as if I still cared. I gave Pete a nod and revved the saw for dramatic effect before letting it slow down. The dark-colored chain spinning around the chainsaw bar must have seemed pretty menacing to him, as his face had turned completely pale. The doors are through me, and there's the window. Choose wisely, grasshopper. I had always wanted to say that last part. Unfortunately, the circumstances finally gave me the chance. Pete glanced fearfully at Chris, then turned and jumped through the window, glass and screen included. I started cursing. Now I'd have to replace the screen, the glass, and the frame. Damn fool. I never thought he'd actually break the window like that. I walked over to the window and looked down at our deck. He was lying on his side, holding his ankle. From where I stood, I could tell it was broken. He wouldn't be going anywhere anytime soon. I set the saw down and focused my attention on my wife. She was crying and trying to apologize, saying it wasn't what I thought, and so on. As if I was some kind of idiot who couldn't realize they'd been pretending to live together up here for the umpteenth time. Chris, shut the fuck up. Listen very carefully to me because I'm only going to say this once, you skanky bitch. I paused as she quieted down. I could see she was genuinely shaken by the tone of my voice, probably more so because I had just sworn at her and called her a derogatory name for the first time ever. I'll start with the facts since you don't have much time. Mary has been notified. She's about 15 minutes away. She'll likely be determined to get here in less than 15 minutes, so remember that. Also, remember that she's really attached to her guns, and she just bought a 12-gauge pump shotgun yesterday. Got that? She looked very scared and nodded. Good. I advise you to get dressed as quickly as possible, grab enough clothes and put them in that damned $400 suitcase you bought last month. As you leave the house, grab the backpack too. It has the shithead's clothes and your dress, along with things that were downstairs on the coffee table I spent months building for you. Your purse is in there, but our joint credit cards and the bank card are not. Your personal credit card is still there. The shithead's credit cards and his bank card are out of his wallet as well. Mary will probably want them. Got that? She nodded once more, tears streaming down her cheeks. I had to avert my gaze and take a moment to compose myself. The pain was deeper than I had anticipated. It's challenging to learn not to trust and love someone you've depended on for nearly a decade. Your truck and the other truck are totaled. It looks like a big tree just crashed into them a few minutes ago. Somehow, both of you missed all that chaos. I suggest you exit through the back door since Mary is on her way, and the news van is parked out front with cameras rolling. I also recommend you assist at the back gate, call a cab, and get him to the hospital. His ankle is seriously broken. Oh, and in case you haven't realized, we're done. The divorce papers are in that suitcase. You've been served and don't plan on coming home anytime soon. Next time you visit, you'll need to be accompanied by the authorities. Do you understand? She nodded again and began to cry loudly. I turned and left to be downstairs when Mary arrived. I didn't want her to lose control and upset either of our spouses, knowing that her impulsive nature could make her act irrationally in the heat of the moment. I wasn't exactly sure when they had started betraying us. It didn't matter to me. Their betrayal was reason enough. The tree had been an instrument today. I had spent a month aware of their actions and trying to conceal my feelings toward both her and him. I stumbled upon their secret by chance, and then made sure not to reveal that I knew. I wanted to resolve things peacefully, and I truly believe that if they had been in their trucks this morning, either one or both, I would still have cut down that tree just as I did. My resolve resurfaced before I could do something impulsive, and now I had to stop Mary from making a reckless decision. Hopefully. As I stepped down from the front porch, the crowd moved in closer. Television cameras were broadcasting, capturing the tree, the flattened trucks, my house, and Josh, who stood proudly with his back to Chris's truck, smiling and speaking with the reporter. He had one foot slightly raised, resting on what used to be the driver's side door. He's probably the nicest person you could ever meet. Absolutely not crazy. He takes care of us elderly folks, always helping out, especially when we can't do something ourselves. He never expects anything in return either. Truly a wonderful man. Truly wonderful. Would you say he's not good with a chainsaw then, sir? The reporter occasionally glanced my way, seemingly trying to gauge my reaction. Josh laughed heartily. Honey, that man right there is maybe the best timber feller in the country. He never misses. He doesn't make mistakes. He places the trees exactly where he wants them and never misses. He's held the champion feller title at the state fair for over 10 years. I've seen him drop 180-foot trunk-bound trees perfectly, even against the wind on a hillside. No, ma'am, he's definitely not bad with a chainsaw. That is, unless you're on his bad side. Then all bets are off. I wished Josh wouldn't be so complimentary of me right now. I hadn't expected the entire country to know that I was a professional timber cutter. It would make my story hard to believe if it ever went to court. I turned to see some of my logging friends arriving. I noticed that Jed had his portable hydraulic log splitter behind his truck. I figured I was going to get some help cutting the log into firewood. Hey, Charlie. How are things going? Could be better, Joe. I've got a situation to handle now. I like your cat litter idea. Cat litter? Yeah. We were curious why you bought 10 or 20-pound bags of cat litter at the grocery store the other day. We didn't think you had a cat. Smart move. Yeah. Well, keep that to yourself, okay? I just didn't want the city inspectors to get upset about oil or antifreeze leaking into the gutter. Man, remind me never to make you angry, Charlie. The voice came from behind Joe. Max stepped around Joe to shake his hand. His grip was firm and his smile genuine. Is that troublesome brother of mine still around? Yeah, Max. I think he broke his ankle jumping out my bedroom window, though. He missed the hot tub, thank God. I'd hate to have to clean up after him there, too. I'm really sorry about all this, Charlie. I never understood that jerk. He might be my brother, but I seriously think someone swapped him at birth and took my real one. Not your fault, Max. I get it. I never once suspected he'd do this with my wife. In fact, I never thought Chris would betray me either. They both looked away for a moment before starting to complain again. Joe shifted the conversation back to work, breaking the somber mood. Well, once these TV guys clear out, we can move this log up. Max, go get your Johnsard. I'll grab a strap so we can pull it off the trucks. Hey, Charlie, is it okay if I set the trailer up over there in your driveway? Jed approached me, patting me on the shoulder. It felt good at that moment. Hey, Jed, yeah, go ahead. Make yourself at home. Sorry about, well, you know. Jed, you and Betty knew what was happening and stayed quiet because you were afraid of my reaction. I respect that, even though it hurt that you didn't tell me. Aw, man. What was I supposed to do? Betty was Chris's best friend and you're one of mine. It was hard not to tell you, but Betty was sure Chris would end that affair soon. She thought Chris must have had a good reason for what she was doing. I knew you hadn't done anything wrong, but those women get ideas and don't let go. I didn't know what to do, Charlie. I really didn't. It's all right, Jed. I forgive you, man. You're my friend and I understand why. It's a complete disaster now, isn't it? Yeah. Betty found out everything from me the other night. I gave her a stern talking to. She's still upset. She called me a little while ago. It looks like this whole situation is on TV today as well. They even caught a shot of that idiot jumping out of your bedroom window, NACD. Hopefully someone recorded it. Josh captured most of it on his camera, but the TV stations probably have good footage too. It'll make a great addition to the scrapbook. I turned and walked away, needing some alone time. I saw Mary speeding up the street, clearly furious, and I knew I would need to use my best communication skills. From the way she was driving, it was obvious she was extremely angry. She screeched to a stop about 3 feet from me, jumped out of her pickup truck with her new shotgun in hand. Her hair was disheveled, and the anger in her eyes was intense. I never wanted to see her so upset with me. I heard the distinctive sound of a 12-gauge pump shotgun being chambered. To my left, I noticed the news reporter and cameraman stepping back, their faces showing a hint of fear. Just fear? Or perhaps some anticipation? Were they expecting Mary to start shooting? It made me question the nature of reporters a bit. Mary! Put it down. They're gone. He broke his ankle jumping out of the bedroom window, and Chris took him to the hospital. I wasn't sure if Chris had actually done that, but I hoped she listened to me. She knew Mary well enough to realize that Mary could lose her temper easily, and when she did, she always went overboard. I hoped I could calm her down before she did something reckless. I'll shoot both of them. The idiot and the tramp are both finished the next time I see them. God damn it. Mary, calm down. I handled most of it, and no matter what, if you follow through with your threats, you'll be the one suffering from all this mess. I almost went down the path you're on, but a close friend talked me out of it. Who talked you out of that? Josh. He told me he kind of likes me and didn't want to see me wasting away in some jail cell for the next 10 to 20 years. If you keep going this way, that's where you'll end up. Do you really think they're worth all that pain and suffering? Charlie, look at what they've been doing, right under our noses, too. Tears welled up, and then her arms dropped. I finally felt safe enough to intervene and take the shotgun from her hands. She hesitated but handed it over to me, and I placed it in her pickup truck. I also took her keys from the ignition and locked the truck, keeping the keys with me just in case. I turned and embraced her. We stood there as the crowd and cameras watched. Mary, do you want to come over and talk to this old lady? We glanced over and noticed Mrs. Frazier standing next to Chris's crushed pickup truck. She extended her hand, and Mary, in tears, stepped forward to take it. I looked around for the judge but couldn't find him anywhere. He must have been in court. Yeah, I'd like that. Charlie, you joining us? Nah, I've got some wood to chop before nightfall. Best to get it done while I have all this help. Mrs. Frazier gave me a sharp look and then nodded. Come by my place in about an hour, Charles. I'll be expecting you. Yes, ma'am. I'll be there in an hour. Behind me, my friends were muttering to each other. Oh yeah, hiding behind the women like old times. He always thinks he can upset the ladies and make them want to talk to him. It gets him out of more work that way. Hey, Charlie, think we can have this sectioned off in an hour? There's a lot of tree lying around. Yeah, I replied. I know, but you know as well as I do, When Mrs. Frazier says to be there at a certain time, you better show up. You've all heard it and done it before, so back off, guys." They laughed and went back to cutting the remaining part of the landmark into sections. "Charlie Wilson, you are under arrest." I turned to see the local police officers standing by their car trying to look authoritative. The news camera was still filming us as they began to approach. My friends stopped what they were doing and prepared to confront them. I waved them away. Arrested for what? For destruction of private property, vandalism, attempted murder, and whatever else we can find here. In fact, cutting that tree without a permit will also count. First of all, I have a permit to cut the tree. Second, the tree fell badly, and hitting those two pickups was a complete accident. You can't prove otherwise. Third, does the judge know you're bothering me here? And last, but certainly not least, attempted murder? Don't you realize that if I had wanted that jerk dead, he would be? What do you think I am? I have some common sense, unlike you two. Now go away." That last comment made them exchange glances before quietly turning and walking away. The judge I mentioned is an actual judge and somewhat of a friend and neighbor. Despite everything that's been happening lately, he still behaved like a good friend. They didn't want anything to do with the judge, as he could and would make their lives miserable for a long time. About an hour later, I found myself walking up Mrs. Frazier's sidewalk. The guys were wrapping up the section cuts, and Jed was busy splitting the wood from each section. Two of my other friends arrived with their pickups and trailers, busily loading the split wood to transport it to Mrs. Frazier's woodshed. They had chased me away earlier, telling me I wasn't contributing and suggesting I might as well head over to Mrs. Frazier's. Honestly, I needed the break to clear my mind a bit. It had been a tough day all around. As I settled into the large, overstuffed, and very old chair in Mrs. Frazier's living room, I saw Mary sitting there, calm and quiet. Her eyes were red, but overall she seemed much better than she had just a short while ago. I tossed her pickup keys into her lap. "Guess you've settled down and won't be giving me any more worries, right?" "Yeah. I don't think I'll be hunting anymore. Although I will be hunting a lawyer tomorrow," she replied sadly. "My lawyer said they'd help you if you wanted. It might be easier since they already have a lot of information about both parties. Of course, you might prefer having your own lawyer. Just a suggestion. I'll talk to her. She's a woman. I've heard she's the best around here. All right, I'll go see her. How are you, Charlie? It must have been really painful to find this out." "I'll be fine. Probably just need some time. You and we're both hurting like this. I guess we can support each other from time to time if you want. I just mean talking and stuff, you know." "That's so like you, Charlie. You're hurting badly too, and instead of focusing on yourself, you're worrying about me. I suppose we'll talk to each other, but you're right. Nothing else is really happening. I don't think I'll be feeling like much else for a while." I nodded, fully understanding her feelings. How did it feel to watch that old tree flatten their trucks? It felt great. I'll admit it still bothers me that I had to cut the tree down, but the reason behind it made it almost worthwhile. Pete's definitely going to regret switching his vehicle insurance, I'm sure. "Does he still owe a substantial amount on it?" I asked, simply to confirm my belief about the significant debt he likely had on that large stack of scrap metal. $31,900 and a bit more. Yeah, it's going to cost him a lot. Not nearly as much as the trouble I'm going to cause him for it, though. "Do you think he and Chris will stay together?" I inquired, curious about how much she had become involved with the jerk. I have no idea what she saw in him, and if I'm not mistaken, he'll disappear as soon as he's out of the hospital. This is the second time I've caught him cheating on me, and if Chris gets involved with him, she'll be in for a lot of heartache. She was a real fool to lose you like this, so maybe she's not as smart as I always thought she was. Well, Pete does have his own business. That counts for something. Mary began to laugh loudly. I must have looked very confused at that moment. Come on, it's my business. Always has been. My name is on the land title, the business licenses are in my name, as are the loans and other legal documents. He doesn't own anything. I thought he owned everything and you worked for him. Is that what he told you guys? Probably did, knowing him. It's always been my business. He just acted as the manager. I inherited it from a lonely uncle when he passed away. Pete never had anything to do with how it turned out, to be honest. It's always been mine, and it's my efforts that have made it what it is today. Pete is just the figurehead. Oh, I guess you'll be okay then. Better than me, anyway. That's good. I'm glad that at least one of us will come out ahead in this deal. I suppose Chris will be looking for another job. Oh, Charlie, you'll be fine too. I know you, and I know how the whole damn city feels about you as well. You'll do just fine. Trust me. Chris, on the other hand. I could hear my soon-to-be ex-wife's career prospects fading with those few words. Mrs. Frazier walked in at that moment carrying cups of coffee. So, young man, have you talked to the judge yet? No, Mrs. Frazier. Not really the right time for that. Maybe in a month or two. Pardon my language, Charles, but that's complete nonsense. You need to call him and set up a meeting immediately. He's really upset about everything that's happened between you and Chris. He's angrier than a stormy hen at both Pete and Chris as well. He holds you in high regard, just like I do. Judge Frazier isn't much help in this situation, ma'am. Actually, he can be quite helpful. You've initiated divorce proceedings with Chris because of all this. The judge will likely oversee the case. He'll ensure you aren't taken advantage of by her or Pete. He owes you that. He mentioned to me personally. Ma'am, the judge doesn't owe me anything. You've contributed a lot to his family over the years, Charles. Providing us with firewood is just a small part of it, and you're aware of that. You've always looked after me, even when that worthless grandson of mine was treating you poorly. That's different, Mrs. Frazier. It was never about that. Young man, Pete Frazier carries our family name, and he may be my grandson, but he's a worthless scoundrel. What he's caused today will haunt our family memories for years, and not in a good way. You've always been his best friend, along with Max and the rest of us. He should have known better than to mess around with your wife, knowing you wouldn't take it well. We all hoped you wouldn't harm him, even though he certainly deserves it. That's what makes this so incredibly difficult. We all love you, son, even though Pete has become that foolish man. This is tearing us apart. Thank you, Mrs. Frazier. It's been quite challenging. Challenging? Challenging? Damn it, son. You really are an understatement expert. By the way, why aren't you addressing me as Old Lady Frazier right now? Isn't that what you call me when I'm not within earshot? I turned bright red. Mary started and stared at her in disbelief. What? You never figured out that I've always known everyone calls me Old Lady Frazier? Charles, of all people, you should know that I'm aware of things. Yes, you are, ma'am. I'm sorry about... Don't you dare apologize, young man. She responded sharply. I've come to see it as a privilege. Everyone immediately knows who you're referring to when you say Old Lady Frazier, and don't think I don't realize that you all have great respect for me, despite what some might deem disrespectful. I actually kind of enjoy it. After all, I'm certainly not as young as I used to be. Yes, ma'am. Now, go call the judge. He's expecting your call soon. He has some things he wants to discuss with you, and I've known him for nearly 50 years. He's always had some excellent advice for those willing to listen. Yes, ma'am. Have you ever felt like a schoolboy caught smoking in the boys' bathroom or maybe throwing spitballs in class? That's exactly the impression Old Lady Frazier could give with just a few words. She had a certain presence. She always valued honesty, and if you were sincere about your feelings, She would respect your differing opinions. Her husband, the judge, was much the same. Together, they were community pillars as well as Pete and Max's grandparents. What a predicament we're in. Are you kicking her out, Charles? Mrs. Frazier continued. Yes, I handed her the divorce papers some time ago. I believe she took Pete to the hospital. I hope that's the case. He fractured his ankle. He's incredibly lucky if that's all he ended up with broken. We feared you might break his neck or even shoot him. By the way, great job with removing that tree. I've never seen it done better. Thank you. I bet you're already preparing a case of, it was just an accident during a standard tree fall, aren't you? Yeah. I wasn't sure if I should be discussing any of this with Mrs. Frazier, or rather, Old Lady Frazier. The trunk had more tension than I initially thought. That's what made it spin the way it did. Keep that straight face and explain it as thoroughly as you can, young man. I've been around, I know you, and I'm certain there's no one better at felling timber than you. That's what I'm worried about. That's why the judge wants to talk to you. He has some very important legal advice for you. I think he wants to keep you out of any trouble. You know he holds you in high regard, Charles. So do I. Thank you, ma'am. Oh, yes. Nice touch using cat litter under those trucks, young man. I appreciate that you took care to prevent oil and antifreeze from draining into the sewers. Blushing, I nodded. Mary was staring at me with clear admiration. Did you plan all of that? She asked, her question hanging in the air as Old Lady Frazier looked at me and burst out laughing. Mary, 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 I thought you knew. Charles here orchestrated everything, every single step. Pete breaking his ankle from that reckless jump out the bedroom window was probably just bad luck, but everything else was meticulously planned. Remind me to never get you angry with me, Charlie. It's not that serious, Mary. You could have dropped that tree on Pete while he was in his pickup. Why didn't you? Like I said, they aren't worth either of us ending up in jail for. They made their choices, so to speak, and now they have to deal with the consequences. She really loved that truck, Charlie. Yeah, Mary, she did. Apparently more than she loved me. Mrs. Frazier approached me and placed her hand on my shoulder. I guess we all forget how much you invested in her, Charles. I'm so sorry it ended up like this. It's all right, Mrs. Frazier. What did I just say? You can call me Old Lady Frazier. I like that. Okay, Old Lady Frazier. I felt my cheeks redden even more at the idea of using that name to address her directly. I now regret ever learning it in that context. Fortunately, she chose to accept it respectfully, despite how it might have sounded. I should go up there and assist the guys. There's plenty of logs that need to be cut into firewood. Son, they've already finished. Jed and Max were unloading the last trailer into my woodshed a little while ago. They're quick when they need to be. They could probably use a couple of beers right about now. Maybe you should offer to buy them around at the tavern. Great idea, Mrs. Old Lady Frazier. I'll take care of that. Charles, no matter what happens, you're a good man. There's no one better. Do you hear me? Yes, ma'am, I hear you. I embraced Mary and Old Lady Frazier before leaving. The beers were quite enjoyable considering the circumstances. The guys teased me, which lifted my spirits despite the situation. They were true friends of the finest sort. Max was definitely nothing like Pete either. What he'd mentioned about someone possibly swapping Pete at birth with his real brother really resonated with me. He often told me I was more like a brother to him than Pete ever was. We had grown up together, so I was accustomed to hearing that over the years. I spent the following 4 nights by myself. The old house felt vast and empty. A friend of a friend had contacted Josh, informing him that Chris was spending time with her parents. Her parents were far from pleased with the situation, but she was their only daughter, and blood is thicker than water. I wasn't surprised. One night the judge visited me at home, and we had a conversation. He was worried about my well-being, and also needed to inform me about some legal do's and don'ts. He didn't want me to end up in jail, especially since I had come dangerously close when I cut down that old tree. He had taken some actions on my behalf, but he needed to explain the reasons and methods to ensure our stories remained consistent. Don't get the wrong idea. He wasn't lying to me, nor was he assisting me in breaking the law. He simply advised me on what to say to steer clear of certain issues, suggested ways to phrase a few things to keep potential problems at bay, and guided me on handling my upcoming divorce. 2 months later, during a hearing, Chris's attorney was caught off guard by the judge, which irritated the judge and effectively halted the divorce proceedings. After some reflection, the judge reconvened the meeting and delivered a decision that left my lawyer impressed and Chris's lawyer astonished. I hereby grant the divorce based on the original terms presented to this court. I approve the petition filed by Mr. Charles Masters with prejudice. And no, you cannot appeal it, Chris. For the past 2 months, you've been delaying this process, seemingly trying to persuade Charles to abandon the divorce action against you. I disapprove of your tactics and have grown extremely frustrated with them. You acted the way you did, and now you must face the consequences. Charles has offered to split all marital assets in half, which I consider more than fair. Chris's lawyer hadn't anticipated the abruptness of the decision and was initially taken aback, but they quickly adapted. Your Honor, my client deserves a better arrangement. She has been supportive of the marriage and has— Young man, if you continue, I will hold you in contempt of court. I'll have you thrown in jail and I might not bother returning the key. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Your Honor. Chris, I'd like to speak with you privately before you leave. The judge appeared sorrowful as he addressed Chris. We were all dismissed. I was curious about what the judge intended to discuss with Chris, but at that moment, I just wanted to leave the courtroom and breathe in the fresh outdoor air. Chris, I'm confused about your actions here. I understand you don't want a divorce, but can't you see that you blatantly exposed your affair with Pete to Charles? My goodness, young woman, you exchanged a nice car for a pickup that looks just like his. What were you thinking? Chris stared at the ground, unsure of what to say to the judge. She had been involved with the grandson of her husband's friend, and she still couldn't understand how it all happened. All she knew was that a small flirtation had escalated into a serious and dangerous situation. In the past few months, she had been reflecting and trying to figure out why she had betrayed her husband. But the only answer she came up with was that she did it simply because she could. This realization troubled her deeply. She knew she had made a mistake and realized there was no way to fix things. Now the judge was scolding her in his private chambers. At least he kept it confidential and didn't make it public in the courtroom, which she preferred because there were too many curious eyes and ears. Charles no longer looked at her, and the few times he did reminded her of the day her entire world fell apart. The sound and sight of the chainsaw bar smashing into the bedroom door had terrified her beyond words. She had feared that Charlie might kill her. And strangely, she stopped thinking about Pete after that moment. She had taken Pete to the hospital to avoid Mary. She had followed her husband's advice without hesitation, knowing deep down that it was likely the last advice she would ever receive from him. Hearing Charlie call her a skanky bitch had devastated her. That pain still lingered in her heart. She must have looked terrible standing there nacked with another man who was also nackty. This man was, or had been, her husband's best friend. She had been a skanky bitch. The pickup truck and how Charlie had destroyed it, the small things Charlie had done for her over the years that she had dismissed, even Charlie ensuring Mary didn't reach her. All of these added up to a lot of foolish thoughts she had about how the affair would turn out. She never imagined that Charlie would discover the affair. In her worst nightmare, she thought that if he found out, he would be hurt and their marriage might survive. But that wasn't how things turned out. She was still worried about finding another job. Discovering that Mary owned the business and that Pete was just an employee shocked her deeply. Firstly, having Pete and her work together in the same office wasn't a good idea. They had both broken certain rules. Secondly, her new boss, Mary, made it clear that she would be fired as soon as possible. So Chris quit immediately, apologizing to Mary as she left. Charlie had always been the one person she could talk to about anything, and now, well, he wasn't there for her at all. Obviously. Finally, there was the fact that all the morning's events had been broadcast live into everyone's TVs and living rooms that day. The entire world had witnessed what happened, profoundly affecting her psyche. She had everything, and she gave it up for what? The relationship with Pete wasn't particularly fulfilling. She certainly didn't love him. She reminisced about that day and the coffee table Charlie had made for her. She had adored that table. Admittedly, she never really showed it by neglecting its upkeep, but knowing that Charlie had built it for her, dedicating his time and patience purely out of love, had deeply moved her. Chris pondered this and realized she had assumed Charlie would always be there for her. Believing this to be a certainty, she felt she could treat his gifts however she wanted, knowing he would always be there to fix them or create or buy new ones for her. He knew she loved him, right? She had been so selfish. She had let him down. She had disappointed everyone, her family, Charles and his family, the judge and his family, and worst of all, old lady Frazier. That elderly woman had treated Chris like an adult for years before Chris was one herself. Now she barely spoke to her. Chris recalled the disappointed look on Mrs. Frazier's face when she saw her at the grocery store after that day. Mrs. Frazier was there with the judge, and they both kept their distance from her as if she were contagious. Seeing that expression broke Chris's heart. All for some excitement with Charles's best friend. A best friend who, after being with her once, began to belittle his best friend every time they met. A best friend who led his friend's wife down a destructive path and then abandoned her as if it were entirely her fault. Looking back, Chris now realized that love was something she took for granted when she received it, but didn't truly consider when she gave it. The true value of love only became clear to her after she had destroyed it. I leaned back on the cabin's porch. Josh had owned this place for years, and right after my house was sold and Chris and I finalized our divorce, he offered the cabin to me. I was aware of the cabin, of course, but during the title transfer I discovered it included 700 acres of land. "Josh," I said, "have you lost your mind? This property is worth so much more than the $72,000 you're offering. 700 acres? This can't be right. No way. People might think you're losing it or becoming senile when I bought it from you. They'll believe I took advantage of an old, vulnerable man." "Hold on now. Give me a minute, sonny boy," Josh responded irritably. "First of all, you know just as well as I do that I'm perfectly sane. There's nothing wrong with my judgment. Secondly, I can sell my property at any price and to anyone I choose. Thirdly, I've already turned down 3 offers from developers who offered much more than what I'm offering you. The reason you're getting it at this price is because I know you, son. I've known you all your life. I trust you won't sell it to some developer who would turn it into a housing complex, cut down all the trees and modernize it. I know you'll take care of it and understand what I really want for this property. Josh, you know this property is worth millions. You know that. Only to some developers. To you or someone like you, it's priceless, right? Well, of course, but nothing, young man. The price reflects what I know you can afford. It ensures that no damn developer will ever ruin it. Besides, I'm really glad you sold your house to that couple. They're very nice. You could have sold it for a bit more to that other guy. So why didn't you? You know why. That guy is an asshole. He was just looking to make a profit from the place and thought I needed to get out quickly because of the divorce. He was partly right. I did want to finalize the divorce as soon as possible. So you could have sold it for a lot more money, yet you chose to give it to that young couple with 2 kids. Why? Because they reminded me of when life was better, and I wanted to help them. I trust they'll do the right thing with the place. Oh, I see now. Yep. I always knew you were smarter than most gave you credit for, Charlie. Take care of the place, you hear? It's peaceful up here. I can look down the mountain and see the entire valley, the city lights, and even my old neighborhood. I added a hot tub to one side of the cabin, along with a nice deck. With these additions, it was more than just a cabin, but I still call it the cabin. I built a separate garage connected by a covered walkway. Along with the old barn with its hip roof and the workshop, I had a great place to live and relax. The corral added a rustic charm, and I had restored it to a usable state. I was even boarding 6 horses for some of the city folks below. They had 700 acres of private riding grounds, and of course, a vast forest of national park land right behind. I still work for the same company, doing the same job, overseeing timber sales and managing logging crews. Boarding those 6 horses was also becoming a nice source of income. Josh still visits occasionally on weekends, as do the judge and Mrs. Frazier. Naturally, my old friends come by too. I haven't seen Chris since we signed the papers, and to be honest, I do miss her. I really do. I don't miss what happened and wish it could all disappear, but ultimately, life's lessons can be unforgiving and difficult to handle. I started dating a nice girl after some reckless dating in the past. She's someone special, and I've been considering committing to her, keeping her, that is. I'm still a bit hesitant about getting close to someone, but she's been gradually breaking down my barriers. Even when she's at work, I can see her since she's on TV most days. Absolutely. The TV reporter who was present the day I cut down the old tree really stood out to me. Some time passed, along with many lessons learned, but she eventually interviewed me for a piece on logging. I invited her out, and as they say, the rest is history. She has a still image of that old tree resting between 2 pickup trucks. It's been shared online, featured in various jokes on TV shows, and even appeared on some humorous birthday cards and similar items. She successfully sold the rights to the image quite effectively. I still laugh when Josh visits and notices the framed photo on the fireplace mantel. That's because the frame is made from wood from that very tree. Instead of the typical shotgun or other decorations that usually hang above the mantel, the Johnsard saw takes a place of honor there. I no longer use the saw for cutting anything, and I haven't since that day. However, Jessica knows it still functions. I've started it up a few times just for fun with her. Occasionally she glances at it and shudders. When I asked her about that, she simply said she never realized how effectively that saw could cut wood. She also sometimes remarks that Chris was really foolish to go where she did, in the way she did. I have to agree with her. After all, Chris lost a fine pickup truck and ended up with, well, not quite nothing, but she doesn't have me anymore, and I know that really upsets her. Jessica, on the other hand, feels happy and secure knowing that I'm committed to one woman. I always have been and always will be. I've experienced firsthand what life is like when someone isn't faithful. If you look closely, you'll notice some stains on the wood of that old picture frame. Oil and antifreeze can penetrate even green wood quite well. When I built and coated the frame, I intentionally left the stains in. It sort of completes things, don't you think? I know it helps me stay focused on the important things in life.